Hello, and welcome to The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. Citizens' assemblies have been around for over 50 years. Their purpose is essentially to tap the wisdom of the civilian crowd in crafting solutions to some of society's most stubborn problems. A recent project in Oregon to tackle the problem of youth homelessness is a case in point. Are there synergies to be realized when communities are asked to step up and play a role in creating policy-based solutions to issues in their region? Here to help us understand the structure and impacts of citizens' assemblies is Linn Davis, a program director at Healthy Democracy, a nonprofit that facilitates this way of engaging the public. Thanks for joining us on The Excerpt, Linn.
Thanks for having me.
Your organization was centrally involved in a recent citizen assembly experiment in Oregon regarding homeless youth. Tell me about that project, what your role was, and what the learnings were. How did it go?
Yeah, so this project happened over a few months this fall, a couple of meetings, sometimes they're much longer. But in this one, there was a group of around 30 people that addressed this issue across Deschutes County in Central Oregon in cooperation with a number of nonprofits and local governments and a group of local, currently or formerly unhoused youth to address this issue from a broad basis, from a number of different angles. And they heard from a bunch of different people in the community, experts, stakeholders, and came up with a number of different solutions, 22 supermajority supported solutions across the assembly that ranged from specific policies for the school district, for example, to more broad, longer term solutions to this issue.
And what did you learn there?
Well, I think we learned, as we do in every one of these, that everyday people from all walks of life can do in-depth policymaking. I think we often think that we, the people, are good for putting other people in office or doing some last-minute kind of decision-making around policy issues, when in fact we have the ability to actually do the work of policymaking ourselves. I think that's what these processes prove. Even folks who are, just off the street, randomly selected. But, if we trust folks to make decisions in criminal trials, then we should also trust folks to be part of the deep parts of policymaking all throughout our system.
This hasn't been the first project your team worked on in Oregon. You worked on a project in the state 13 years earlier about voter information. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, exactly. It's called the Citizens Initiative Review, and it was a series of projects across 5 different states and a couple of other countries to specifically use what we call civic assemblies, our citizen assemblies, policy juries that go by a number of different names, to review ballot measures, so initiatives or referenda, and provide better quality voter information. So this was in response to the fact that voter information around ballot measures can be very confusing, lots of mis and disinformation, lots of money in these systems, but that ballot measures are really potentially powerful. It is one of the only opportunities that we have as everyday folks, as voters, to actually be part of a decision-making process around policy. And what if we could give more of that system back to voters, do voter information by voters for voters, in this case, a representative sample of voters from across the public, a sort of state in one room that is listening to experts, is listening to the pro and con campaigns, and then is producing high quality information, which they did for quite a number of years on a wide variety of issues, even very technical issues like corporate sales taxes, that kind of thing. And very controversial and emotional issues like recreational marijuana.
Linn, not all government workers or stakeholders regarding specific political issues. What changes have you noticed when the people who come together to solve a particular issue have skin in the game, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we all feel a sense of ownership over public policy. And I think right now we have a situation where we don't. And that's causing a very understandable, I think, ambivalence and dissatisfaction with our governmental system. And that's a problem for democracy in the long run. We need to feel like we all, not on every issue, we're a big country, even in a city of 50,000 people, it's impossible for everyone to be involved in every issue, of course. But some of us need to be involved on some issues some of the time, and we need to know that other people just like us are also involved in a deep way on other issues when we're not. That's the way that we sort of get back in the game of politics, all of us, that's not just yelling at each other, but is actually working together to find common ground solutions and problem solve, which folks who are just everyday folks, who don't have constituencies to appeal to, who don't have a lot of money, can do better than anyone.
It sounds reasonable. Is it difficult to get people to buy in? How do you build that team cohesion that's so important in affecting policy change?
There's no substitute for time. A constraint that we're often faced with, sometimes even more than money, is sort of a desire to rush these things or to outsource them, to delegate them to other people. I think many of us, even though we believe in ourselves, believe that we can't do it as well and say, hey, that we should just bring in the experts or we should elect somebody else to do everything. There is a place for both of those things. It's very important. In fact, the outside advocates and experts in these processes are essential for the public to tap into, but for those folks to not necessarily be on top in the room doing the final decision making. Just like in a jury trial, you wouldn't have the witnesses or the lawyers making the most difficult decisions themselves. You bring in a group of everyday folks, a jury of one's peers, to do that. That's the same kind of idea here, and it's really a surprise to me. I think that it hasn't been done more in the past because it seems so obvious to the way that we think about our system of government.
Beyond civic engagement, are there other benefits that arise from these collective discussions, perhaps by creating the opportunity to build greater faith and trust in government and other public institutions?
There is never any issue with folks on the assembly buying in. In fact, there's usually a very low rate of drop-off during these programs. Once folks are in the room, they see that this is a different kind of politics. They see that they're building a community with folks. They're seeing what the work is and that their voices are going to be listened to in a different kind of way as well, and that they have sort of an unusual level of credibility in the eyes of the public because they're this representative, random group of people. That does the work for it. I should say they also come with a high level of design. It's not in some ways like a jury trial in that the jury doesn't go off and do its own thing, sort of in absence of process. There is a huge amount of development of public process that goes into the inside of the assembly in order to make sure that everybody from all walks of life feels universally able to participate as well as they can, sort of get the most out of everyone, and to make people feel comfortable, and to make sure that groups are functioning, as fairly as possible.
In Europe, these kinds of citizens' assemblies to advise on government affairs are quite common. Why do you think leaders in Europe have been more active in creating these kinds of assemblies, and what's been the result there?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors. I think that to some extent, our belief in our own system of government, which is wonderful, sometimes trips us up and makes us not apply that sort of American innovative spirit to the way that we make decisions, which is odd because that underlies so many of the other things that we care about across all sectors of our society. But I think sometimes we get kind of locked in to the way that we've done things before. I mean, so does Europe for that matter. But I think there's been a little bit more activity, both from a grassroots perspective and from academia and from civil society and from government. It sort of takes a little bit of everyone that's moved in the direction of sort of innovation on democratic processes, of everyday people involved in the sort of meat of democracy just a little bit faster. But I don't think there's anything particular to any part of the world about this. It's just people dealing with decisions that affect them.
There's an upcoming project this spring in Fort Collins, Colorado, about land use. What's that one about, and what are you hoping to solve here?
Yeah, so this Deschutes County project was kind of unique in that it was all privately funded, and it was about a very broad-based topic. This one in Fort Collins that we're running with a number of partners, including the city there, is much more specific on a particular piece of land that the city owns and what exactly should happen with that in the future. And there's been a lot of, as in many of these cases, a lot of background. There's been a ballot measure there already that specifies some kind of park-related use, but there's a lot of questions open around what exactly that means and what a great opportunity for the community or a representative slice of the community to come together and help make that decision. So that'll happen in April and May this spring. And as I said, a little bit more of a traditional kind of specific topic for an assembly to dig into, but the same level of depth and the dozens of different kind of external inputs of information and viewpoints that will come into it. And then a whole lot of different kinds of processes that folks will go through in order to work on a wide variety of potential issues that could come up in that decision.
And finally, Linn, do you envision any sort of national infrastructure so that these projects can be better sourced and supported in the future? What would need to happen for this to be the reality?
Yeah, I think this is the real key. And as with many things in many parts of our society, funding from philanthropy and from government could go a long way in sort of making these innovations happen faster. Yes, they're happening by small organizations and forward-thinking public servants all across the country, but a national sort of fund for internal democratic innovation within the United States could really go a long way. And we have funding for that. There is a National Endowment for Democracy that's funded by the American people for projects abroad, but we don't have that in the United States. And there also, I think, is understandably a desire on the part of foundations to fund strengthening of existing institutions, which is great. But we also need to think forward, and we need to think at what the next thing is and how these institutions may not, in their current forms, be serving we, the people, as best they can. So I think there's that funding side. There's also just sort of research and development and supporting the complex design and the very specific skills that kind of make these the best they can be, both academia and in the private sector. And I think, there are any number of systemic solutions that can be put into place at the local and the state level that can make these happen more often. There's one proposal in Cambridge, Massachusetts, for example, to include a requirement in the city charter that the council must convene one assembly on one topic every year. And something like that that's fairly loose and open-ended could go a long way towards sort of propagating these and creating a demand that creates an ecosystem that makes them happen a lot more often. Likewise, we've worked for a while on an idea to sort of go beyond the initiative review to have another reform for the initiative system where everyday folks, through a series of assemblies, are writing ballot measures sort of from the get-go and really utilizing that system for what it was meant to be in the first place, which is a way for everyday people to work on things that the legislature hasn't gotten to or has a conflict of interest around or that kind of thing. But unfortunately, those systems are really taken over by folks with a lot of money, or they require a lot of money these days. So these kinds of reforms can be used to sort of bring them back to the democratic place they started from. So those sort of a number of different systemic and funding ways that these can become more common.
It's fascinating. Thank you so much for being on the Excerpt, Linn.
Thanks so much. Pleasure.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.